Carthage. You hear the name and images just pop into your head, right? Hannibal, those elephants crossing the Alps, Rome's biggest rival. It's a story we all feel like we know. But what if that whole story is basically a lie? What if almost everything we've been taught about this incredible empire is just flat out wrong? Okay, let's get into it.
This quote, it really hits the nail on the head when we talk about Carthage. See, its history was written almost entirely by the people who conquered it. After 3 absolutely brutal wars, Rome didn't just beat Carthage, it erased it. The city was demolished, its libraries were torched, and its very memory was targeted for destruction.
And that brings us to the real question we're tackling today. Sure, the victors get the spoils, but what happens when the biggest spoil of all is history itself? What if the version of Carthage we've all heard isn't real history, but carefully crafted propaganda designed to make its total annihilation seem justified? So, if we want to find the real Carthage, we first have to wade through the official story, the one that's been repeated for centuries. And here's the problem. That story comes to us almost exclusively from Roman and Greek writers. You know, the very people who had every single reason to paint Carthage as the ultimate bad guy.
According to their version of events, the Carthaginians were just these greedy, chaotic traitors. And worse, they were supposedly these monstrous religious fanatics who sacrificed their own children to evil gods. They were, to put it simply, the perfect villain for Rome's heroic origin story.
But what happens when you actually look at the evidence they left behind? Well, modern archaeology, combined with a fresh look at some of those ancient texts, is starting to show a completely different civilization. The source for this explainer calls the Roman narrative a deliberate distortion of history. And let me show you a perfect example of what that means.
So for years, historians read the Roman texts, looked at the giant walls of a city called Circuane, and said, aha, military fortress, built to fight off enemies. But then, archaeologists got their hands dirty. They started digging. And what they found wasn't a military barracks. It was workshops, luxury goods, trade documents. It was a thriving commercial hub. 2 totally different stories from the very same pile of rocks.
And the author we're looking at today has a name for this kind of thing, the fabricators of history. It's a label for anyone who just takes those hostile Roman stories at face value, basically building up this glorious myth of Rome on top of the rubble of Carthage's reputation.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's try to peel back that propaganda and look at the actual evidence. Who were the Carthaginians, for real? Well, the picture that's starting to emerge is of a super sophisticated, innovative, and stable civilization that even its greatest enemies secretly had to admire. Now, what's so amazing about this quote isn't just what it says, but who said it. This isn't some Carthaginian trying to talk up his hometown. This is Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the ancient world, writing centuries before Rome ever destroyed Carthage. He looked at their government and saw a model of stability and perfection, the total opposite of the chaotic mess the Romans described.
So, what does it take to be considered a great civilization? You've got the checklist right here. Thanks to Aristotle, we can definitely put a big check mark next to system of government. But what about the rest of this list? Did Carthage measure up? Let's tick through the evidence.
All right, let's talk stable food supply and scientific advancements. Forget that stereotype of them just being merchants. The Carthaginians were agricultural superstars. Seriously, they were the first to systematically use iron plows and manure. Their top expert, a guy named Msnsn, wrote a massive 28-volume encyclopedia on farming. And you want to hear the craziest irony? After the Romans burned Carthage's libraries to the ground, the one book the Roman Senate specifically ordered to be saved and translated into Latin was Msnsn's. And this recipe from his book shows you just how brilliant they were. I mean, look at this. This isn't just some vague advice. It's applied science. It's a precise step-by-step process for making a luxury good. This single recipe, which was literally saved by their destroyers, is like a little ghost of a deeply sophisticated scientific culture. Okay, now it's time. We have to talk about the darkest part of Carthage's reputation. It's the elephant in the room, the single most horrifying thing ever said about them, that they practiced systematic child sacrifice. More than anything else, this one accusation has defined Carthage as monstrous for 2,000 years.
So the Roman story is pure nightmare fuel, a giant fiery statue of a god where parents would place their living infants to be burned alive. But when modern archaeologists finally got to excavate that site, the so-called Tophet, they didn't find an altar of horror. They found a
a special sacred place for the most heartbreaking of losses, fetuses, stillborn babies, and infants who died in an age when infant mortality was tragically high.
And listen, this isn't just some New Age theory or one person's opinion. A huge study in the scientific journal PLOS One looked at all the evidence from every possible angle: archaeological, chemical, historical, and their conclusion was totally clear. The Tophet was a graveyard for the tragically lost, not an altar for ritual murder.
And here's the final nail in the coffin for this horrible myth, found right there at the site. A lot of the burial urns didn't even have human remains in them. They had the bones of lambs and goats. And even more amazing, they found one inscription that literally calls an animal a substitute. This flips the whole story on its head. If any sacrifice was happening, it was an animal in place of a child, turning the most vicious Roman propaganda inside out.
So we've pieced together this whole new picture of Carthage, right? Politically stable, scientifically advanced, and the victim of a pretty awful smear campaign. But their story has another incredible chapter, one that's been almost totally forgotten. They were some of the boldest explorers of the entire ancient world.
I mean, just think about this. Around 500 BCE, we're talking centuries before Rome even had a serious navy, Carthage sent out these two massive expeditions. One guy, Himilco, sailed north past the edge of the known world to reach the tin mines in Britain and Ireland. At the same time, another explorer, Hanno, took 60 ships and thousands of colonists south, down the unknown coast of Africa, founding new cities and writing about incredible things, from erupting volcanoes to what he called densely haired people, which is almost certainly the first European description of gorillas.
And this is where the story gets really wild. So almost the entire Carthaginian language, Punic, was lost. But a few lines survived because they were quoted in a Roman comedy. And our source points out that when you put those few Punic words next to words from ancient Irish and Breton, the Celtic languages spoken right where Himilco was exploring, the similarities are just uncanny. It's this tiny, tantalizing clue of a lost world of contact between these cultures.
So when you put all of these pieces together, that old cartoon version of Carthage just falls apart. And in its place, we see this amazing civilization of brilliant farmers, stable governors, and fearless explorers. And that really brings us to the big takeaway from all of this.
So why does any of this ancient history matter to us now? Because the story of Carthage is one of the best examples of how history isn't just a list of facts. It's a narrative. It's a story told by someone for a reason. And the Roman story had a very clear purpose: to justify wiping an entire civilization off the map by first turning them into monsters.
And that leaves us with one last, kinda unsettling question. If a civilization as powerful, as sophisticated, and as influential as Carthage could have its story so completely rewritten by its enemies, well, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other histories are just gone forever, simply because the losers never got the chance to write them down?